Good afternoon. I chose to do my research on the Republic of Vermont. And the Republic of Vermont is a curious example of a group within the United States that during the Revolution shared a lot of the same patriotic impulses, but had sort of a parallel and separate experience in terms of independence from Great Britain. And one of the things that is unique about the Republic of Vermont is I feel that, and the sources suggest that due to a lack of having to compromise with other states, such as the southern states, the Republic of Vermont ended up a more pure and more complete representation of, I think, what a lot of patriots were trying to achieve with the United States, but were not unable to, especially when you consider these ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The interesting thing that makes Vermont unique in terms of its position relative to the other colonies is it was a result of the New Hampshire grants, or essentially the colony of New Hampshire allowed for these groups to self-govern a little separately from New Hampshire, but then also New York claimed that they had jurisdiction of that area, and therefore Vermont couldn't exist on its own. And so this put Vermont in an interesting position, because not only did they have to remain independent from Great Britain, they also had to remain independent from the state of New York. And so there was a push on two sides rather than just one side from the other colonies. And the result of this is some very interesting dialogue and back and forth about the nature of tyranny, not just on the British side, but from the New York side as well. In fact, in the Constitution of the Republic of Vermont, it's very closely modeled to the Declaration of Independence in terms of, the preamble and the list of grievances. And I found it interesting that the list of grievances includes a short mention of how the British had basically invaded and were having an army. But then the list of grievances includes 13 paragraphs of how the government of New York has been overstepping their judicial jurisdiction and their legal jurisdiction with this group. So really, the Vermont Constitution is more of a Declaration of Independence from New York. But the philosophies that drive it are the same. In fact, if one were to compare the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution of Vermont, the verbiage is markedly similar. I'll read you first. The Constitution of Vermont says, quote, "Whereas all government ought to be instituted and supported for the security and protection of the community as such, and to enable the individuals who compose it to enjoy their natural rights and the other blessings which the author of existence has bestowed upon man. And whenever those great ends of government are not obtained, the people have a right by common consent to change it, and take such measures as to them as may appear necessary to promote their safety and happiness." Now, that is the Vermont Constitution. And when we compare that to the Declaration of Independence, we read something very similar. "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of earth, the nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind require that they should declare the cause which impel them to separation." Jefferson's is by far more eloquent, but they both touch on those same principles of natural rights, this idea of a social contract, and the idea that when one side is not fulfilling the contract, they are allowed to separate. Now, the United States does embody a lot of these things, but one of the things that they really come up lacking is these ideas of these natural rights being protected by all. And I think the best representation of this is, of course, with the issue of slavery. The Republic of Vermont really becomes the first country in history to ban slavery outright in its constitution. The Constitution was 1777. And when you look at the reasoning, it's because they quote that all men are created equal and that there are inalienable rights. Whereas the United States struggled with this because they had to contend with the economic impact of slavery on the South. And when you look at, for example, in the debates, you have Luther Martin from Maryland who says that slavery is an abomination, and then you have John Rutledge of South Carolina saying, well, if you're not going to include slavery or you're going to tax it, we may not all be on board with your country. Whereas in Vermont, there was no sort of compromise with the South. Slavery hadn't been as economically significant in New England as it had in the South. And so they're able to do this, but they even took it a step further. And in the Constitution, you can read, therefore, no male persons born in this country or brought from overseas ought to be holden by law to serve any person as servant, slave, or apprentice. And then it goes on to say, every man of the full age of 21 years, having resided in the state for the space of a whole year, and who is of quiet and peaceable behavior, shall be entitled to all privileges of a free man in the state, including suffrage, which is really, I think, encapsulates those ideas of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness because of their lack of compromise and contention with southern states. Thank you.